All right, these oscillator cans are just in the frame, so I could tell one video from another. Now I want to give you a typical example of why I have such a really bad attitude. Uh, when I was younger, actually up until a few years ago, I would just stand there and be polite and never yell at anybody. Well, we had this old Thatcher furnace. That's the name of the company, Thatcher. It came with the house, and it was very noisy. My father didn't like the furnace, and it was getting older. And he bought a new shaft and pillow bearings for the fan assembly. It had a fan, a big squirrel cage fan, and a motor on it that had a starter winding. And it was really a noisy thing when it turned on and off. So my father talked to my mother, and they decided to get a new furnace. Now, at the same time, while they were deciding to get the furnace, the neighbor next door, he decided he was going to go into competition with them. So they started up in the game, and it ended up my parents got the fully electronic furnace by Thatcher with the Sears name on it though, and the neighbor next door got the same furnace. So I'm working overtime in this company. I'm barely getting enough sleep. I'm working so much overtime, and I come home and the house is cold, and we got the new furnace, and I sort of looked at it real quick, and it wasn't lighting the gas, and this thing was all electronic. So they said, well, they had already called, and the guy was coming. So the next night, I come home from work, and I'm sitting there, and they're telling me how smart the guy was. He come out and he fixed the furnace one, two, three. I'm like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But I'm sitting in a kitchen that's ice cold. The furnace is not working. And it would work sometimes. Sometimes it would light, sometimes it wouldn't. So then they realized it wasn't fixed. They called Sears. They sent another guy. And then my father's sitting at the dinner table, telling me how smart the guy was and everything. Meanwhile, we're sitting in a cold house. It's still not working. And my father had a thing there for many years. After I went through basically teenage years, he would argue with me. He'd be on the same side of the argument. He just loved to argue with me. He'd always want to prove me wrong. And it was very embarrassing because I couldn't really talk about anything without him jumping in and starting an argument. So finally, someone pulled me aside one time. I said, your father's very jealous of you. And I was like, how could he be jealous of me? I'm his son. He wasn't the type that wanted to see me do good for whatever weird reason. So anyway, I come home from work, and it was really a bad day. And my mother says, look, she says, I need you to be here tomorrow. We got a guy coming. He's coming in from Chicago for Sears, and he's going to fix the furnace. So I said, all right. They asked me to do that. I'm living in their house. Actually, I'm paying rent. And I stay home, and this guy comes in, and we go down to the cellar, and he takes the panels off the brand new furnace, and he loosens two screws, and he starts moving this part of the furnace up and down a little bit. Moves up and down maybe a quarter inch, and he's clicking the switch on and off. The safety the shutdown switch that's on the furnace. It's the 110, and he turns it on. Here, go bzzz, whoo. You hear it light. He turns the switch off, turns it on, and then it didn't work one time when he turned it on, and he made believe he moved this plate up and down. So now he turns the furnace back on, he turns the safety switch on again, it lights. We go upstairs, my mother sets up a thing of, she makes him some coffee and maybe a Danish or a brownie or a piece of cake, and he's sitting there and he's bragging for like an hour as the house is heating up. And then he leaves. And then we're talking, and I said, boy, was he smart. Man, they have him come out from Chicago or wherever he came out from. And I'm like, oh, man, this guy was a dummy. I said, he was moving a piece of the furnace up and down. He said it was a damper. And I said, it's not. I said, I don't know what the problem is. So anyway, we're sitting in the kitchen, and my mother realizes it's getting colder again. And my father's still singing his praises, that guy's praises, how smart he was. He knew this, he knew that. So anyway, I said, all right. So I go downstairs. I take the panels off the furnace. I lay on my back. I stick my head in there, and yeah, I said to my father, put the switch on and off, or put it on. So he puts it on. zzz, woof, and it lights. I go, all right, I shut it off. What? Shut it off. What's the matter? I said, wait till you see this. And he goes, what do you mean? So I'm looking up into the furnace and I see there's a high voltage unit. It's a square box. It was made by Honeywell. And off it comes a spark plug wire. And it goes over to the spark plug. And the spark plug's mounted to near the burners. Well, here's the problem. There was no spark plug. The wire was just hanging in midair. And when you would turn the furnace to call for heat, the high voltage would jump from that spark plug wire to the burner and sometimes light the flame. Okay, so I looking around, all of a sudden I see a plastic bag there. And I pull the plastic bag. It's taped inside the furnace. And I hand it to my father. I'm still laying on it. I said, here, I said, this is what's wrong. Well, what's this? I said, it's a spark plug. Well, how do you know it's a spark plug? I'm like, oh God, you know. We're going to go down this road. He's going to argue against me in praise of that guy that just left that didn't know what he was doing. This is why I'm the way I am. I had these people around me. I'd end up fixing the thing, but when they remember the story, it was the guy that came from Chicago to fix the furnace. So anyway, I said, let's get the manual out. So we had the manual, and we go over, and the first day when you install the furnace, you're supposed to take these 2 screws and screw this spark plug thing near the burners. And the whole time I'm doing that, well, how do you know it goes there? I said, look at the diagram. Now, my father had a TV repair shop. He was a tool maker, but this is how his brain would shut down. And he would start babbling like an old washwoman. And it was very annoying. And I used to get through this. And I continued to mount the spark plug and put the wire, like the wire from the car, the spark plug wire, with its boot. You know the boot, it goes on the top of the spark plug. And I'd fire it up. And it worked fine. And it worked for 6 months. And then the furnace stopped working correctly. So they had a guy come out. It was intermittent again. Guy comes out, same thing. Oh, you got one of these electronic furnaces. These things are tough. And he's standing there, and I'm just laughing. I'm like, you know, I'm going to have to fix this furnace. I'm going to watch this bumbling idiot. And bumble he did. And as soon as the furnace did come on, he made believe, oh, this wire was loose here. I tightened it up. And he left. Boom, he was out of there. Okay, so now we're a couple hours later. We're sitting, and it's cold again. And my mother gives me the look like, you're going to have to fix this furnace. So I go down, and at that time I had these light bulbs, and they had clip leads on the end, and I could put them one across the transformer, and it told me I had 24 volts. And then one would go across the circuitry for the thermostat upstairs. And you could tell whenever someone put the thermostat on and off, the light bulb would go on and off. And then another one would go across the high voltage board. Whenever it would call for heat, you'd see the light bulb come on for a few seconds until the furnace would light, and then that voltage would shut back off. Well, anyway, so I have my light bulbs all installed, and they're all lighting, and the furnace still isn't working. So I get my voltmeter out, and I start following. Now, there was a damper on this furnace. This furnace had all these bells and whistles for those days. No, it didn't have a pilot light. So anyway, I've troubleshoot it down to in the damper. It used a synchronous motor, like a clock motor, and it would turn against the spring. And when it would call for heat, it would shut the voltage off to that motor, and the clock spring would go and drive the motor backwards. And you hear it go, boom, poof, light, and the furnace would light. And what it was is there was a switch there, and it had to be a wafer switch, so it couldn't short out. So I look at the wafer switch, and it's all pitted and burned. So now it's in the home position where the furnace should light. I have the power off. I put my my ohm meter there, and it's open. So I'm taking it. My father the whole time, well, how do you know that's bad? This is a guy that watched me go to tech school. Unbelievable, huh? So I said, that's burnt out. You don't see that's burnt out? And he's holding the wafer switch. And I go over to my box of parts, because I was storing and keeping stuff. And I come out with a wafer switch, same size. And he goes, well, how are you going to use that? I took this wafer switch apart. I took the wafer switch part out. So it's a phenolic thing with a rotor in the middle of it. I don't know if you guys ever seen the inside of a wafer switch. Well, anyway, dropped that in there, soldered it up, fired the furnace up, it worked fine. Now that would only last about 6 months, and those contacts would wear away. So I went over to the electronic barn, and I bought a bunch of wafer switches to take those wafers out. And then I realized I could parallel 2 sets of contacts. And I serviced that furnace. But that's how I was treated by my own father. And everybody said, what a nice guy he is. Yeah, he was a nice guy until he felt threatened in any way. And then he would double down. He would make things impossible for you to repair by making up these phony rules. And when he's your father, you got to go along with that. And my mother would make these phony rules up so she would control her half of the house. And then I come along, and as I got smarter and a little bit more assertive, I realized the two of them didn't know what they were doing. They'd have repairmen come out and not fix something, and then I would do it. And from an early age, that's what I did. That's why I'm the way I am. That's why I go freaking crazy when somebody pulls any kind of, well, you don't know what you're doing, or, you know, I worked in this company, I know how it works, and you don't. You shot from the hip, and you missed, okay? And that's why I'm the way I am. And most of my neighbors, I fixed everything for them for free. And when they would tell the story, it was their kid that did it, okay? And only one person ever caught the fact that he was wrong. He's telling the story. Me and him broke up the sidewalk in front of his house, okay? He did most of the swinging of the sledgehammer, but I taught him if you take two 2x4s and you sisted them together with some screws or nails, and you cut an angle on the end of it, and you get under the sidewalk and lift it up. You put a brick under there or a rock, and now it's hollow. And when you come down with the sledgehammer, the pavement, the sections will break up. Put them all on the street. I called the town. The guy come down with a backhoe because they used that for fill. They took them away, and then we redid the one with grass and seed. And he starts telling the story about 2 years later, and he's saying it's his son, John, that helped him. And I'm sitting there going, all that freaking work. I worked it all day in the blazing hot sun, and now it's his son that doesn't do anything's got the credit. And then all of a sudden he just stops, and he looks at me, he goes, wait, that wasn't my son. That was you. I said, yes, it was. Okay. Out of all those people that I grew up with, one person actually stopped himself and made it me, because it was me, okay? All the other people, when they tell the story of the problem, sorry, this went wrong, now, it was their son, and their son had no clue what the hell he was doing in electronics, but that's what they would do, because they had a thing for their children, which my parents didn't seem to have, okay? My parents were like, I'm fixing the thing, no one else could fix it, it's now working, and they're doubting my technical expertise. No matter how much money I made, it was amazing, you know. And oh God, yeah. And you can't go back and change that stuff. And that's the stuff that bounces around in my head and makes me the way I am. All right, that's it.